I'm Aleksandra Samulenkova. I'm a type designer specializing in Latin and Cyrillic scripts. Besides type design, I enjoy making typographic illustrations where I treat letters in a more extravagant way. Today, I would love to share one of my illustration techniques with you. Today, I'm going to show you how to make typographic illustrations in this technique. I call it a digital weaving, and the principle behind it is simpler than you probably think. There is no 3D modeling involved. It all can be done in ProCreate, but the technique itself can be also used in other programs. So if you are more comfortable working in Photoshop, this routine can be recreated there as well. So we will work with two layers. I filled them with different colors so that you are not confused, and each of them contains a shape with, let's say, holes, and those holes allow us to intertwine these two shapes in a nice artistic way. So let's start by creating a new file, new canvas. Needless to say, it can be any size, any resolution, any format, whatever works for your idea. I prefer to work in square, so that's what we will do now. I will cheat a little bit. I will paste my artwork here so that I can more precisely recreate this particular question mark. Let's create a new layer. Let's sketch roughly the contours of our object. In my case, it's a question mark. It will be just a reference so that you know that we have an idea of composition and proportions of the object. Doesn't have to be pretty. Doesn't have to be very smooth. It can be also a sketch you did on paper and took a photo of. Now, let's make that layer almost invisible, almost transparent. Let's rename it as a reference. And now let's add another layer. Now we can start working on one of the two layers that we will use. Let's say it will be a bottom layer. Let's call it that way as well, so that we don't get confused later. And please remember that we only work on the dot for now, because it's a simpler shape, and we will do the question marks body separately. Let's choose a drawing tool. I usually work with a default studio pen. To create a shape with some structure, with some holes, there can be two approaches. We can either start drawing the holes first, something like that. And then add the outer contour, and then fill it with the color. Or we can first draw the outer shape and then fill it with the color, choose an eraser, then outline the holes. And then use the automatic selection with a threshold 99.9% to select those holes and clearing them out. The second approach is preferable if you are working on a shape with smaller holes, with more dense structure, but since we have a rather big holes here, I prefer to actually draw the holes first. So that I will do now. It gives me a bit better control of the placement of them, of the holes. So let's add the outer contour. Let's fill it with color. Yeah, by the way, this technique works best with a white object on the dark, let's say black background. So now the smoothness of your contours, of your edges, it's up to you. It can be also nice and, you know, angular, but for this particular sketch I will use the more smooth but not perfect shapes. Another thing that I would love to advise for this particular style is that you keep the thickness of your strokes more or less consistent all over your artwork. They don't have to be exactly the same, but the difference should not be too big. Let's add another layer. We will call it top layer. And let's draw another structure, another shape with holes in it. I usually make the bottom layer slightly more transparent so that it doesn't disturb me, and we can switch off the reference completely because we don't need it for now. So make sure the top layer is selected. Let's choose a drawing tool, and now I will start with drawing the holes first, because that way I will be in a better control of their placement. And the placement is important because now, as you can see, I draw the holes, let's say, in between the holes from the bottom layer. Let's make it go out. Now we can add a contour. Fill it in, and then repeat some smoothing out procedure, same way as we did for the bottom layer. Now, before we continue, there is something important you should do. You should copy your top layer and you should copy your bottom layer, and you should maybe group them and save them for later. We will not need these copies now, but we will need them later. As a next step, we will add a drop shadow to both our layers, the top layer and the bottom layer. And let's start with the top layer, and I will for now temporarily change the background color so that the drop shadow is better visible. The drop shadow will be black. It's the most practical thing to make your drop shadow in the color of your background, which is black in my case. So let's select our top layer, let's duplicate it, let's select the bottom copy of the layer. I will make now the top copy invisible so that you see that I'm filling the bottom copy with black. And now I will apply a Gaussian Blur filter to the whole layer. If you tap and drag to the right, you can increase the blur value, and I usually use something between 11 and 13%, so let's make it 12. And now when we switch on our top copy of the top layer, you see that here it is, the drop shadow, and we can merge it because we have a copy of the same layer for some later procedures. So let's merge it down. Let's make it invisible so it doesn't disturb us. Let's make the bottom layer visible. Let's duplicate it. Select the bottom copy of this layer, fill it with black. Apply the blur to the layer, 12% it was. Again, we can merge it and make the top layer visible and bring the background color back to black. You can see that with the drop shadows, this structure already starts looking somewhat three-dimensional. Now we can start the process of what I call it digital weaving. What we will do, we will select some areas of our bottom layer and we will paste them on top of our top layer. And that way we will create that effect of intertwined layers. So let's start. Let's make sure that the bottom layer is selected. Let's go for a freehand selection tool and let's see. Maybe this part could go on top. So let's select it and let's change the feather. Let's make it 6%, 6 or 7%. You will see it will ensure that there are no visible seams when we paste it. So now let's copy it. I use a shortcut. I use my 3 fingers. I swipe down to get this menu and I choose duplicate. So you see there is a new layer. We don't see it because it's exactly the same as the bottom layer. But now when we will place it on top of our top layer, you will see that it creates that effect of intertwined objects. And now things will get a little bit messy because I will merge it with the top layer. If your resolution is not very high and you can keep many layers in your file, then you can also leave those layers unmerged. But since I'm working usually with a higher resolution and my limit is 12 layers, I prefer just to merge it down with the top layer. So now our top layer contains some little parts of the bottom layers but they are on top of the top layer. What else from the bottom layer could go on top of the top layer? Let's again go for freehand selection tool and yeah, I think this nice intersection here can just go on top. Let's make sure that the feather is increased a little bit. Let's make sure that the bottom layer is selected. Again, swipe with 3 fingers down, select duplicate and bring that little piece on top. And here you go. It's getting more and more entangled. Again, let's merge down. Maybe this part here can also go on top. Duplicate, bring it on top. I think by now it looks entangled enough, so we can merge it down. And we can also by now merge it down with the bottom layer, the top layer and the bottom layer. And we have our dot more or less ready. So now we can continue with the body of the question mark. So we can turn the reference on and add another layer, which will be the bottom layer for the question mark. Let's rename the layer containing our dot to avoid confusions, because now we will basically repeat the procedure with the body of the question mark. So again, there is a layer which is called bottom layer, and that will be the bottom layer for the body of the question mark. Now again, I will start drawing. I will start with the holes.
And I will just start to, I will try to recreate the placement of the holes from my artwork, but when you work from scratch, you will have to concentrate on composition, rhythm, structure, so slightly different priorities. Now I'm just trying to do something similar to the structure I did for my artwork I showed you in the beginning. Make things a little smoother and a little more consistent. Remember what I said about the thickness of your stroke, the thickness of the white bridges between the holes. It's kind of cool if they're consistently thick. Well, it doesn't have to be very precise again. Please note how the shape of one hole kind of influence the shape of the neighbor hole, kind of influencing each other, and that, I think, makes it look natural, as some biological structure. At least I have that association. Okay, so now let's add another layer. It will be top layer for the body of our question mark. Let's make the bottom layer quite transparent. Let's switch off the reference, it doesn't help us anymore. Now I will draw the top layer, and again I will try to recreate the placement of the holes from my artwork, but when you do that from scratch you will have to consider the possible intertwinings when you place the holes on your top layer. You will have to think a little bit what will be your intertwining possibilities. So let's add the outer contour. Okay, now let's polish it a little bit. And when you do that, you always think about how things will intertwine, right? So, and there is no secret, no any special tactics. You just have to think when you draw the top layer. You think which part it will cover, which intersections will go on top. Okay, I will turn on the opacity of the bottom layer to the max to see whether it still looks like a question mark. Well, barely. So let's move it a little bit apart. By now we can throw away the reference, we don't need it anymore, and it would be now a good moment to add drop shadows to the body of the question mark, to both layers, top and bottom. But first let's duplicate and save them for later. I'll rename them into question mark bottom layer and question mark top layer, and I will place them in the same group as the layers for the dot. Now I will just merge those layers, the top layer and the bottom layer of the body of the question mark and the dot. We won't use it right away, so we can keep it invisible. And let's add the copy of the top layer of the body of the question mark. Okay, I will again make the background color slightly lighter so that you see what's happening. We copied a top layer of the question mark. I will fill it with black. Let's make the bottom layer invisible. So let's add 12% of the Gaussian Blur. Let's merge the top layer with its drop shadow. And let's do the same for the bottom layer. And we merge the bottom layer top copy with the bottom layer's bottom copy. So now we can again set our background color to black. Let's again make sure that the bottom layer is selected. Let's go for a freehand selection tool. We can zoom in. Let's start with this little area of the bottom layer. We will select it. We will change feather to 6% or 5%, also fine. We will copy paste it. I do that by swiping down with 3 fingers. That evokes this little menu. I choose duplicate, and you see I will make the bottom layer invisible, so you see that that little part from the bottom layer is there separately from the bottom layer itself, and we will place it on top and we will merge it with the top. Now let's follow that path in other directions. So here it goes on top, here it goes underneath, here it goes on top, here it goes underneath. Let's make this part here go on top. Select it. Okay, now we see that it has to be a bigger area because otherwise we'll be interrupted. So we select a bigger area. We set the feather value to 6%. Make sure that the bottom layer is selected. That's always important. And we copy paste that area. We duplicate it on top. Now we can merge the body of the question mark with a dot. We don't need them to be separated anymore. Let's also rename the layer for consistency. It's time to add some finishing touches. Imagine that our object is cut out of paper or some kind of fabric. Even if it's a very thin paper or fabric, still it will have some thickness to it. I prefer to make the edge lighter than the surface of the object, and that is why I want to make my question mark slightly less white than it is now. I will use the curves for the layer, for the question mark. I will select gamma and I will pull that upper corner of the curve slightly down. You can see that it's getting darker. That is what I want. Doesn't have to be very dark, but quite a bit darker. We can also enhance the shadows a little bit. The shadows can also get a little darker. Remember those 2 layers that we saved at the beginning for later? The ones without the drop shadow. We will use them to make that edge that I mentioned before. So first let's get them out of the group. Let's put them on top. The group can be deleted. It's important that they're still in the same place as our artwork. You can see that they still fit exactly, and that is important. I will now rename these 2 layers into edge 1 and edge 2. Let's start with edge 1. I'll switch off edge 2 for now. So first of all, we duplicate the layer, and then let's fill the top copy of that layer with some color other than white. That will help us to see what we're doing. Now we can zoom in. Let's select that red layer and let's move it down and to the left a little bit. That way we define the thickness of our edge. Now let's use the automatic selection tool and let's select the red areas. I also changed the feather amount. Let's make it 1%. And now with the selection of the red area, let's choose the bottom copy of that layer and let's clear it. And the red layer can be removed and we'll see that we have the edge. Let's switch on the artwork so you can see. Let's repeat the same procedure with the edge 2. and you can see we have the edge for both layers. We can also merge them now. There are some areas where the edge should be removed, like here, for example. And we will do that with the eraser. I use the same studio pen, but slightly smaller size. The more complex is your weaving, the more unnecessary edges you will have to remove. I make the edge layer slightly transparent, around 90% or slightly less. That will help to make it slightly more three-dimensional. Switch on the alpha lock so that you only adjust the parts of the layer that are not transparent, and then you can choose a softer brush, very small size, and maybe not fully transparent, and then you can gently delete the edge layer in spot like that. Okay, I think I'm done with it. Quite tedious process. I'm almost done with this question mark, but I would love to add some liveliness to the object. Flat and very even. And I want it to be slightly less even. I want to have some tone variation. And I will make sure that the artwork itself is selected, not the edge, which is still a separate level. I will select a softer brush, like airbrush. I will go for quite a big size, and I will go to adjustments, curves, and this time I will select pencil. So it will adjust the curves in the places I will paint. And yeah, gamma is good. We will pull the curve down. So in areas where I will paint now, the tone of the selected layer will go down slightly. So I see, maybe it's a bit too much. Let's make it slightly more transparent. You can do that pretty much in random places, but I tend to do that at the upper top areas of your object. But you can also be pretty random about it. Just add some tone variation to make it less flat. I think now we can safely merge our edge with our question mark. And as a final fine-tuning, you can play a little bit with the curves, maybe to make the contrast a little higher if you want. I remember I mentioned that I'm not quite happy about these two big openings here. I think I have an idea how to fix that relatively quickly. I will add a layer, and I will go back to my studio pen drawing tool, and I will draw a loose shape to fill those two gaps, these two holes. I will now make a copy of it so I can make the edge later. Let's choose pencil. Let's make it darker. Very well. Now, okay, let's copy that white layer that we have. Let's make it visible. Let's fill it with black. Okay, we don't see it, but it's now black there underneath. And let's add some Gaussian Blur to make it to make a drop shadow. I think it was 12% that we used for the rest of the artwork. So let's merge it. Let's send it to the back, and let's make the edge as we did it before. Maybe we can even intertwine some part of it with the main artwork. Okay, and I declare it done.